The bishop stood at the front of the room, his hands folded in front of him, and he said my name. Martha Stoltzfus. Please come forward. I remember the sound of the wooden bench creaking as I stood up, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I could hear that small sound when my heartbeat was so loud in my ears. 200 people watched me walk to the front. My mother was crying silently in the second row. My father would not look at me, and the thing they wanted me to confess to, the thing the entire community had already decided I had done, I had not done. Not any of it. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Before I tell you what they accused me of, before I tell you what I said when I finally reached the front of that room, let me introduce myself. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I share the truths from inside a community most people only see from a distance. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, and what I'm about to tell you is something I have never spoken about out loud until today. If you want to hear honest stories from behind the prayer cap, please subscribe and tap that like button. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Tell me what happened. I read every single comment. Now let me explain something that took me years to fully understand. In Amish communities, the church is not a building. The church is the people, and the people meet every other Sunday in someone's home or barn for a service that lasts nearly 4 hours. Hard wooden benches, slow hymns from the Ausbund, sermons in High German and Pennsylvania Dutch. But twice a year, something different happens. Twice a year before communion, the church holds what we call council meeting. It's a long service where the bishop and the ministers ask the entire congregation if there is unity. If anyone has a complaint against another member, this is when it is brought forward. If anyone has sinned and needs to confess, this is when they kneel. Council meeting is the most serious gathering in Amish life. Communion cannot happen until every member is in agreement. Every grievance settled, every confession heard, every soul accounted for. And if your name comes up at council meeting, your life can change in a single afternoon. I was 16 years old, and my name came up. It started 3 weeks earlier. There was a barn fire on the Lapp farm 2 miles from our house. Nothing catastrophic. The family got the animals out. The neighbors came running with buckets and hoses. And by morning the barn was a black skeleton against a gray sky. But something had been stolen during the chaos. A small wooden box from the family's bedroom, the kind every Amish family keeps. Inside were several $100s in cash, money saved for a daughter's wedding the following spring. In a community where most transactions still happen in cash, this was a serious loss. The Lapp family did not call the English police. We don't do that. Problems inside the community are handled inside the community. Instead, they spoke to the bishop, and the bishop began to ask quiet questions. Who had been at the fire? Who had been inside the house? Who might have known where the money was kept? I had been at the fire. I had run there with my brothers when we saw the smoke from our pasture. I had carried buckets. I had helped lead the horses out. And at one point, when the youngest Lapp child was crying in the kitchen, I had gone inside to comfort her. I had been in the house for maybe 4 minutes. I had walked past the bedroom door. I had not gone in. I had not touched anything. But somebody saw me, and somebody told the bishop. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning. My father stopped me in the kitchen before I went out to milk. He held his hat in his hands, which he never did indoors, and he asked me quietly if there was anything I needed to tell him. I said no. I asked him what he meant. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "The bishop is coming to see you on Thursday. Bring your apron clean." And then he walked out without saying another word. For 2 days I lived inside a kind of fog. I went through every motion of every chore. I fed the chickens, I hung the laundry, I helped my mother bake bread for a sister's family, and the whole time my mind kept going back to that night at the fire. Had I done something wrong? Had I said something? Had I touched something I shouldn't have touched? I could not think of a single thing, and that somehow made the fear worse, because if I didn't know what I had done, how could I defend myself? The bishop came on Thursday afternoon with 2 ministers. They sat in our front room on the wooden chairs my grandfather had built. My mother served coffee with shaking hands. My father stood near the window, and I sat across from 3 of the most powerful men in our community. The bishop was a kind man. I want you to know that. He was not cruel. But the system he served was bigger than his kindness, and what he had to do that afternoon was bigger than him. He asked me about the fire. I told him everything. The buckets, the horses, the crying child, the 4 minutes inside the house. He asked me if I had gone into the bedroom. I said no. He asked me if I had seen anyone else go into the bedroom. I said no, I had been with the child the whole time. He asked me if I had taken anything from the lap home, anything at all, even something small I might have forgotten. I said no. He looked at me for a long time, the way my father had looked at me 2 days before. And then he said, "Martha, somebody saw you go upstairs." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I had not gone upstairs. I had stood in the kitchen with the youngest lap child until her aunt came to take her. Then I had walked back outside to help with the buckets. I had never been upstairs in that house, not that night, not ever. But somebody had said they had seen me, and in our community the word of a member who has been baptized carries weight that almost cannot be moved. I told the bishop that whoever said that was mistaken. I told him I would swear it on the Bible, on my mother's life, on anything he asked. He nodded slowly and said that swearing was forbidden by Scripture, and that he was not asking me to swear. He was asking me to confess. He said the matter would be brought before council meeting in 2 weeks. He said I should pray. He said I should examine my heart. He said sometimes the Lord brings forward sins we have buried, and that confession before the church is a gift, not a punishment. Then he stood, and the 3 of them walked out, and my mother sat down on the kitchen floor and wept. For 2 weeks I lived in a house where nobody spoke to me directly. My sisters whispered when I walked into a room. My father took his meals in silence. My mother's eyes were red every morning when I came down for breakfast. Not because they believed I was guilty. I think now, looking back, that they did not know what to believe. But the bishop had spoken, and the community had begun to speak, and in our world, the speaking of the community has its own gravity. It pulls everything toward it. Friends I had grown up with stopped greeting me at the schoolhouse fence. A girl I had shared lunch with every Sunday for years walked past me at a wedding without lifting her eyes. My closest cousin came to me one evening in the garden and asked me very quietly if I had done it. I said no. She looked at me and said, "Then why did the bishop come?" And I had no answer for her, because in our community the bishop coming to your house was already an answer. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish insider guide is in the description. The Sunday of council meeting, I put on my black dress, the one we wore for funerals and serious church days. I pinned my prayer cap with hands that did not feel like my hands. I rode in the buggy beside my mother, and she did not speak the entire way. The service was held in the Baylor family's barn, cleaned and swept, the benches arranged in long rows, men on one side, women on the other, almost 200 people. Every adult member of our church district, people who had known me since I was born, people who had held me as a baby, people who had brought casseroles to my house when my grandmother died. The first 3 hours were normal service. Hymns, sermons, scripture, I could not hear any of it. My ears were ringing the whole time. Then the bishop stood and announced that there were matters of discipline to bring before the church. And he said my name, Martha Stoltzfus. Please come forward. I walked to the front of that barn on legs that did not feel like mine. I stood facing the congregation, and I saw 200 faces looking back at me. The bishop stood beside me. He spoke in Pennsylvania Dutch, and he laid out the accusation plainly. That money had been taken from the lap home on the night of the fire. That a witness had placed me upstairs in the house. That I had been given 2 weeks to examine my conscience. And now, before the gathered church, I was being asked to confess. He turned to me and said, "Martha, will you kneel and confess?" And here is where my story becomes something I have carried for the rest of my life. I did not kneel. I stood there in front of 200 people, in front of my weeping mother, in front of my father whose face had gone white, in front of every person who had ever known me, and I said the only words I had. I said, I cannot confess to something I did not do. I said it in Pennsylvania Dutch, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me, because everything else in me was shaking. The barn went absolutely silent. I have never heard a silence like that before or since. 200 people not breathing. The bishop looked at me, and I think for the first time he saw a person and not a problem. He asked me again, more quietly. He said, Martha, the church is offering you the path of confession and forgiveness. Do you understand what you are refusing? I said I understood. I said I would not lie to God or to the church. I said if there was a witness, I wanted that witness to come forward and look at me and say it to my face. Nobody came forward. The bishop called for a recess. The men gathered in one corner, the ministers and the deacons, and they spoke for almost an hour. The women sat in their rows and did not look at me. I stood at the front of the barn the entire time. Nobody told me to sit down. Nobody brought me water. I had become, in that hour, something that the community did not know what to do with. A girl who would not bow. A girl who would not lie. A girl who might be guilty, or might not be, and either way had broken the order of how things were supposed to go. When the bishop returned, he said the matter would be set aside until further investigation could be done. He said I would not be placed under the ban that day. He said the church would pray for clarity. And then he dismissed the service, and 200 people walked out of that barn, and not one of them looked at me as they passed. 3 months later, the truth came out. A young man from a neighboring district confessed at his own council meeting. He had taken the money. He had been in the house that night, and he had let the rumor about me spread because it kept attention away from him. He named himself, he kneeled, he was placed under the ban for 6 weeks, and then he was restored to the church. Nobody ever apologized to me. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. There was no second council meeting where the bishop stood up and said the church had been wrong. There was no public clearing of my name. The people who had stopped speaking to me began speaking to me again, slowly, the way you might approach an animal you had once frightened. My closest cousin came to my house and cried in our kitchen and asked me to forgive her. I did. My mother held me for a long time one evening and said only, I knew the whole time, but she had not said it then, and I understood why she had not. To defend me publicly would have been to set herself against the bishop, against the church, against the whole structure that held our lives together. She did what she could. She loved me in silence. In our world, sometimes that was the most a mother could do, but something had broken in me that I could not name for years. When I left the community at 23, my therapist asked me what the hardest moment of my Amish life had been. I expected to say the wedding I never had, or the shunning, or the day I got into a stranger's car with a single suitcase and watched the farm disappear behind me. But the answer that came out of my mouth was, the day I stood in front of 200 people who had known me my whole life, and not one of them stood up for me. She wrote that down. Then she said something I have thought about ever since. She said, a community that requires your confession before it offers you its protection is not protecting you. It is protecting itself. I sat with that for a long time. The Amish world gave me real things. A childhood with my hands in good soil. Faith I still carry, in a different shape now. A community that knew how to bring a casserole to a grieving family without being asked. But it also taught me that the truth of one girl could be smaller than the comfort of 200 people. It taught me that being innocent was not the same as being believed. It taught me that sometimes the people who love you most will sit silent in a barn, while a bishop asks you to kneel for something you did not do, because the cost of speaking is bigger than they know how to pay. I do not hate them for it. I understand them. I came from them. But I also know now what I did not know at 16, that a person's voice belongs to them, that you do not owe a confession to anyone for a sin you did not commit, that standing alone at the front of a room and telling the truth, even when nobody believes you, is sometimes the most faithful thing a person can do. If you grew up in a place where the community decided your guilt before you were allowed to speak, I see you. If you ever stood in front of people who should have known you better and watched them look away, I see you. If you ever carried a silence for years because nobody told you that you were allowed to be angry about it, I see you too. You were not wrong, you were not proud. You were a person asking to be believed, and that is not a sin in any scripture I have ever read. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. If this story stayed with you, leave me a comment and tell me what part hit hardest. Tell me your own story if you are ready. And if you want to keep hearing the truths from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much more I have not said yet. Much more I have not. Until next time, your truth belongs to you, even when nobody else will hold it with you. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.